All right, thank you very much. We thank you very much for our panelists, of course, and our audience for coming to today's side event at the CGIAR, FAO, and the Rockefeller Foundation Pavilion, brought to you by both the World Fish Center of the CGIAR and IFAD as well. The topic of our today's conversation is going to be around transforming climate resilient aquatic food systems for shared prosperity. And as we do so, we will explore what it takes to make a transition from vulnerability to resilience to prosperity through aquatic food systems. And today we are very privileged to have experts to enlighten us on that important topic. To my left, we have Gerald Miles, who's the Vice President of Government Partnership of the Environmental Defense Fund. And to Richard's left, we have Dr. Ahmed Nasrallah, who is the country director for World Fish in Egypt. And online, we are joined by Suiko Yoshijima, who is the Senior Environmental Specialist with the World Bank. And we also have with us online Richard Abila, who is the Senior Technical Specialist in Fisheries and Aquaculture with IFAD. Thank you very much all for making the time to join us today. So just to set the scene first, as we all know, aquatic food systems, or some regard to it as blue foods, which involves fisheries and aquaculture, they create employment opportunities to millions of people around the world. But also they are a means of livelihood for more than 800 million people around the world as well, a source of nutrition, and they create income opportunities as well. But however, they face major threat from climate change, either through reduction in productivity, or affecting our blue infrastructure as well, and so on and so forth. Therefore, if we were to realize a shared prosperity, and we're using that word quite intentionally here, because there's been a transition from the categorization of people working in fisheries and aquaculture as regarded as or labeled as vulnerable section of our societies, towards resilience. How do you make them more resilient? And now the wish is to go beyond that. How do you realize prosperity? Because we generally believe everyone in this world has some prosperity aspirations. So we know the impacts of climate change on our culture and fisheries, but at the same time, there is that aspiration to realize prosperity for ourselves, our children and grandchildren. So what does it take to realize that prosperity aspiration under changing climate, but through aquatic food systems, be it fisheries and aquaculture? So that's the sort of question we aim to answer today. And maybe just to kick off the discussion, I'll probably invite Gerald as first speaker. And the question that I have for you, Gerald, is, yes, it might be easy to say we would like to we would like to transition, from vulnerability, resilience to prosperity, right? Which might be easy on paper, or easier said than done. And these things, the transition doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It needs institutional enablers that enable transition. So, do you mind, Gerald, highlighting those points in terms of what it would take from an institutional setup point of view to be able to realize that ambition?
Thanks so much, Esam, and it's lovely to be here with this great panel. It's a really important topic, and I'm going to step back a little bit. I started engaging in this work back in the late 80s, early 90s, when the Climate Convention was open for signature in Rio. So I go back a way. So watching this transition to a point where we've tried to bring environment and development together. We've finally got to that point. We've figured out that we need to go beyond development goals to sustainable development goals, which were universal. And now we're at a point where most recently the G7, under the chairmanship of Germany, has recognized essentially what you just described, that when we invest, if you like, in solving climate change, and we want to do something to reverse the rate of biodiversity loss and deliver these development goals, they have to be connected. So it is a pathway to prosperity generally that is about connecting what we've done to some extent in silos in different organizations. So I think that has changed, and now the question is, well, what do we do about it? And I'm only going to give you, I have no answers really to solve that problem. That's what you're here for. World Fish is going to lead this work. But it's quite clear that a lot of this work has gone on without a clear voice from local stakeholders, local fishers and communities, and we're starting to figure out ways to bring that voice to the table. It's quite clear messaging about, if it's about us, it needs to be with us. That's very hard to do on a global scale, but there are organizations like World Fish, EDF and others which are working locally to figure out where that can happen locally. Our challenge, I think, is one of also scale. When you build prosperity in one place, is someone else losing out? Are you dedicating your attention to something? There are equity issues here. So I'm going to approach this from a broader perspective and say, can we do this more broadly? So the three things that we're observing need to happen is bring that voice more clearly into the conversation, where its need is being driven, is driving what we do. The second piece is that the institutions involved, particularly as we think about financing and solutions, that we have organizations focused on the policy environment that needs to create the right sorts of nurturing and enabling, through to the organizations that are thinking about de-risking some of this work. So as we think about climate and climate risks, what tools can we bring there? Different investment tools that are building trust funds and local cooperatives and organizations that are working in that space. The role of philanthropy and organizations in the non-profit sector like the Environmental Defense Fund, thinking about climate resilient food systems and so on, right through to the World Bank and the investment and concessional loans that need to be provided to support the scale of the change that is needed. So the second piece, in addition to the voice, is those parts of the puzzle, those institutional parts coming together and thinking more in a more connected way about supporting prosperity, because we will continue to fragment not only our investments but also the tools that we're applying. We do need many flowers to bloom, so we won't all be connected all of the time, but let's think about how can we better stack not just our capital but our tools and our institutions in support of blue prosperity. The last piece is, and maybe as we think about the next few years, building the political framework. So the third piece we're observing is there are some countries that really recognize the value of this prosperity to social cohesion, to feeding country, to addressing rural-urban migration, and this is working perhaps with a group of countries ready to support the sort of connected institutional support and financing that can really work with coastal communities. So I'm going to stop there. Those are my kind of 3 takeaways at the moment.
Very much. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Gerald. That was really useful in a way, because I think it's really, really critical when you talk about institutions. And I want to share with our audience as well one story. I come from Eritrea myself, and from East Africa. And I remember once, I had this unhealthy obsession with fisheries, particularly small-scale fisheries and small-scale food producers. And I was challenged once by my then minister, asking me, is it really worth it? And the reason is that it's not because that person did not want for small-scale fisheries or small-scale aquaculture to prosper, but it's just that because most of the time, we have very limited understanding of the value or the contribution of small-scale food producers, because they're not accounted for in our national accounts. And therefore, when they go to the Ministry of Finance, for instance, it doesn't just show up. How much contribution is it making? Very limited understanding. And as a result, there's constant institutional bias, right, towards the sector. And I think that's one of the reasons why we generally believe that, fixing that institutional bias is so critical. But how do we do that in partnership, bringing up those voices of the small-scale fishers, be it through bringing them to the dialogue or data as well. So we do a lot of work in capturing the value of small-scale fisheries and making sure they are mainstreamed in national accounts, so therefore their contribution is very well understood. But what happens as a result of that institutional bias is this chronic finance gap, right, towards the sector. And because that's to tackle that bit, because transitioning towards prosperity through aquatic food systems will require significant investment. And therefore, maybe just to answer that question partly, let me invite Suiko from the World Bank now to tell us a bit more about the approach of the World Bank in trying to fill this chronic finance gap in the sector. Suiko?
To share the presentation that I prepared. I just try to give you an idea what kind of project that the World Bank is doing to support the fishery sector. Or would you like to do the composition?
No, please.
Rather?
Hello, sorry, if you can hear me, Suiko. Yes, I think ideally we would prefer a moderated discussion format, but I'll be delighted for you to share with us maybe a couple of slides that would aid your intervention as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
So maybe I would just show selectively. Okay. So the World Bank, as you mentioned, that fisheries is a sector, but it's also fisheries and aquaculture are the key for food security and economic development worldwide. But because of the climate change, it's facing a lot of challenges. And in order to support this sector, we are providing the various supports from the World Bank. And in Africa region, we have some regional cooperations to strengthen the governance on the fishery sector, and then also the supporting the communities to improve their livelihoods, strengthen their fishery production in the area. And also like a various program, another project program in Africa, Swordfish has a similar series of the programs to address the challenges of fishery sector, but with more stronger focus on the countries. Like more relevant to the climate change, a recent program in the Asia Pacific on the Pacific Island Regional Oceans Program, Oceanscape Program, PROP, is also supporting the fishery sector in the area. and then like more talking about innovative financing, like we provide a support to the countries with financing because we are the bank, but with a technical assistance, awareness raising, and then also the policy development is also the area that we always work with the government. But some innovative financing, for example, in Caribbean, we have designed the Caribbean Ocean and Aquaculture Sustainability Facility. It's called COAST, and it's the first ever parametric insurance for the fishery sector to cover the losses attributed to the fishermen due to bad weather. So we using the financial instrument, like we provide the various supports to the sector. And as you mentioned, for this, how to kind of bring the prosperity based on the support for the small scale fishermen, with the financing, like we can do, if there's any good best practices or something that can be scaled up, the bank financing can contribute to such activities. And then more importantly, it's very important to mainstream this climate change effects into the policy agenda. So that part, working with the government to strengthen the policies, we also can contribute to such efforts. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Suiko, for that. Maybe sort of a quick question off the top of your head, Suiko. If you look at all the portfolio that's being invested in food systems, for instance, by the World Bank, how many % do you think goes to aquatic food systems in fisheries and aquaculture?
So fishery, I don't have like exact figures, but right. All this, program is in the magnitude of the 100, like a plus 100 to 200 million, counting all the series, because especially for the interventions in Africa, it's quite long term. It's called kind of a programmatic approach. Yeah. So there's several phases. The longest one is the swordfish, which has 5 phases. So the cumulative investment would be a couple of 100 millions. Sure. But these are the magnitude that we are talking about. Sure. And I also forgot to mention, but the most importantly, we have a S-Fish program that is relevant to the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden as well. Right. And then this is a 40 million project, which became effective recently in August this year. So it's just starting, but sure. We are looking forward to expanding this program, because right now the local interventions that we have only Yemen, but we have a plan to engage other member states in the region of the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden in the future.
Thank you very much, Suiko. I think that's a nice segue now to our next panelist, actually, because you've just nicely landed us into the region, the Red Sea in particular, which involves, of course, Egypt as well. So we have Dr. Ahmed Nasrallah, who's the country director for World Fish. Ahmed, you've been leading the ACliSAT project, which you will tell us a bit more about that. But, if our angle. The reason why I'm saying that is when we talk about prosperity, I think, as Gerald said earlier, it also has this sort of, a equity concern, which essentially is whose prosperity are we talking about? So how do we deliver benefits to those who need it most? How do we make sure we reach those who are furthest behind? And it would be really great to hear from you, from the project that you're running in Egypt, and how you're aiming to realize the shared prosperity aspirations.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Assam, and I'm happy to be with this great panel with us today. Advanced climate smart aquaculture technology. This is the explanation of ACliSAT. This is a FED-funded project in 3 countries: Egypt, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. The project is centralized about advanced climate smart aquaculture and using climate smart aquaculture for improving income and job creation, food security in Africa. This was in our vision at this time. Prosperity was not in our vision, so I'm happy that we start to think about a new dimension, which is prosperity. So, and actually the project designed to contribute to prosperity, but this was not clearly defined in the project itself. As you know, East Africa is subject to climate change, and most of the region is about semi-arid area. Water availability is an issue. So to sustain aquaculture production, we need to move climate smart. And the project is built about several technologies in aquaculture. First, in inbound raceway technology, which is considered climate smart as double production or triple production, and reduce effluent going to ponds, improve productivity, improve biosecurity, better quality of product. So it is, according to FAO, this can be classified as a climate smart aquaculture. Other type of smart aquaculture, it is integrated agriculture aquaculture, which is common across the three countries, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. In Egypt now, since 20 years, integrated agriculture aquaculture start to be available in the desert part in Egypt. As water is scarce and pumping water is costing, and so the double use of water for increasing in farmer income and biosecurity, and this contribute to prosperity. In the same time, in Ethiopia, the baseline study demonstrates there is 4,000 ponds within the farm, and use in integration was not clearly visible to them. So the project is working on them to utilize these 4,000 ponds in integrated system approach for increasing income and food security and prosperity. Also, we find the same required in Eritrea, integrated agriculture, aquaculture, as water scans in Eritrea, and there is water dams, etc. And agriculture is concentrated around water dams. So we working with our partner. I'll leave Dr. Abila to talk about the project objective and the partner. We work with our partner in Eritrea, which is Ministry of Marine Resource, to go for integrated agriculture, aquaculture, to improve water productivity. The system, climate smart aquaculture system in Egypt maybe not the same applied in Eritrea or in Ethiopia. For instance, IBRS in Egypt may not be succeed in Ethiopia or Eritrea because of electricity is not stable. So in Ethiopia and Eritrea, we focus more on integrated agriculture, aquaculture. We focus more on small volume, low volume, high density cages. For using dams, there is 300 dams in Eritrea. Some of these dams could be used for fisheries, and we work with MMR for this. This is one dimension for the project, which is focusing on system productivity and capacity buildings, and the end user and beneficiary of this is the farmers. The project is targeting 1,000 beneficiaries in the three countries, 85% in Egypt, and 15% in Ethiopia, 10% in Eritrea. Having Egypt as part of this project, this is another dimension to transfer experience, technology transfer from Egypt to Ethiopia and Eritrea. And this works well as we bring our colleagues in Ethiopia and Eritrea to Egypt, and we do the opposite, go and visit them to technology transfer and exchanging experience. And Dr. Richard giving us a lot of support in this dimension.
Sure.
The second point of the project, which is producing good quality fish feed from local feed ingredients. As feed ingredient is limited in Eritrea and Ethiopia, so we tailor feed formulation to best fit with the farm situation. The third dimension is using fast-growing species selected, genetically selected tilapia to increase productivity.
Yeah.
This is the first component of the project. The second component is the capacity building and developing training modules to be used in the three countries and knowledge package material to be used in the three countries. I'll stop here and.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. I think it's really great. Just to share to some perspective with our audience as well, in present here and online, is that if you look at aquaculture, right, in Africa, a significant majority of that, about 70% or so, comes from one country, I believe, which is Egypt, right? So when you look where we are here now, so this is the major producer of aquaculture in Africa, and therefore you point about seeing Egypt as a launching pad for this transfer of technology to the rest of Africa on climate smart aquaculture. I think that has huge opportunity. There's a huge opportunity there. But also, I think just a question to our audience: how much do you think the continent of Africa produces from coastal aquaculture? We're talking about finfish here. A mere 500 tons of fish. The entire continent. That's a giant island which has 3 times more water body than its land mass. Therefore, the opportunity for growth, realizing prosperity opportunities through fish farming across Africa is significant, right? So maybe to ask Richard Abila maybe to tell us a bit more about the IFAD's approach for the promotion of climate smart aquaculture in East, but more broadly in the continent as well. And I believe you are joining us from my hometown, Asmara. Is that correct, Richard?
Yes, I'm actually in the FAO office in Asmara. And actually the reason why I'm here is following up on the progress of the climate smart aquaculture interventions, as well as other interventions in the fisheries sector in Eritrea. IFAD actually has, in the last few years, has put quite a lot of attention in the continent of Africa, and particularly in aquaculture. You may know that we normally, the partner states normally have a lot of leeway in deciding where they see as opportunities. And what we see is that a lot of interest is going to aquaculture. Currently, we have big programs, and big programs here we are talking about somewhere between 50 to 140 million per country. For instance, in Kenya, we have 140 million invested in aquaculture. In Tanzania, Angola, Eritrea, Mozambique, Cameroon, these are countries which in the last 5 years have requested IFAD to work with them on aquaculture. The total budget comes to almost close to $400 million US in this sector. And now, coming to ACliSAT, now this normally fall under a special category in terms of IFAD's funding because they are financed through grants. Normally, these are relatively small grants. The cap normally is up to $2 million US per project. In terms of ACliSAT, it is, I think, $1 million US co-financed with by Wildfish to, I think, $250,000 US. So normally, these grants serve quite a special purpose because they allow us to take, some risks in terms of testing new ideas, new technologies, innovations, learning to work with different partners, contributing a lot, in areas where governments might not wish to put loans. For instance, in issues of policies, developing maybe plans, strategies, and things like that. So ACliSAT itself, it serves quite an important purpose. Now, in Eritrea, we have a big investment program which is focused a lot on the marine sector. But for the first time, the government asked us to try a new idea working in dams, in the water reservoirs. Now, Esam, I'm sure you know the landscape of Eritrea quite well, but there are quite a number of dams which are spread around the countries. I think the estimate is close to 300. These dams were basically established, I think, mostly for irrigation and possibly, of course, water catchment and some domestic purposes. But they were certainly not intended for fisheries because the communities, most of these areas are not traditionally fish eating. So I remember when I came for the design of the big investment program, the Minister of Marine Resources at that time challenged me that, look, we don't think that actually we are going to have any success in making fish, to turn as a livelihood in these areas, because these are basically meat or beef eating communities. But we decided to try it out. We started with about 15 dams, and that is when we, of course, also got wild fish through ACliSAT into this, developing the whole system of seed production, technologies, development on how to do aquaculture in these dams, and training, forming cooperatives to be able to not only fish, these are small cooperatives, not only to fish, but also to process the fish and do value addition and enter into the market. Now, it is now about 3 years since we started serious engagement in this. And the report which I just got this week is that the catch statistics from the dams on what the communities have so far raised is about 25 tons from the dams. But we went closer, even interacting with some of the communities and to see really what they are, what it means to them. So we went to one community where they say, they are catching on a daily basis 25 kilograms, about 3 times a week, and which mostly they use for nutrition and selling a bit of it. So to them, it makes quite a big difference. And what they tell us, from their own words, that, for the first time, they are able to actually use fish. I mean, they used to see the water there, but it really didn't make anything to them in terms of food. But now, for the first time, they're actually getting proteins. It's something they never used to eat, but now they're eating. And most recently, FAO now is also supporting this initiative with some equipment in mobile kitchens, quite modern facilities for value addition and processing fish to get it more into the market. So we are seeing, quite a big opportunity. As I mentioned, we have started with 15 dams, which have worked quite well. The government recently has asked us to expand to 21 dams. And the opportunity, I would say, the sky is the limit in terms of what they can do in the freshwater sector in the country. Now, leaving that introduction aside, I mentioned that this is one area which IFAD has been quite pleased to work with wildfish. It's not the only area where we're working wildfish. We're also working in Nigeria and Ghana, using some resources. And really, we have quite a previous strong background of partnership in various areas. Yes. So we see quite good opportunities. And we are quite actually happy in the way the resources are being used in this process, in this particular intersection.
Excellent.
To be able to make a change.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
Richard. That was very rich example, Richard. I think that's an excellent one. It helps us to visualize in terms of what is happening on the ground, but also it gives us a very clear idea in terms of the potentials of realizing this shared prosperity. Of course, on the ground, and particularly in Africa. at least. So that's really wonderful. But I guess one of the questions that I have for everyone on the panel, and I'm happy to invite the audience if you have any question to our panelists as well. Okay, I will probably keep my question, but let me give gentlemen in the audience to.
Thank you very much. My name is Mohammed Abdelmonem. I work in FAO, Regional Office for the Near East and North Africa. And thank you very much for this very interesting session. The reason I want to talk here because we just finished one study on climate smart agriculture practices in Egypt. And we picked the aquaculture in the northern of the country as one of, we classified as a climate smart agriculture because for the definition of FAO, climate smart agriculture have to contribute to livelihood, adaptation, and mitigation. So if you see these three pillars, then you start calling it climate smart. And from our perspective, when we put it at that pillar thing, it works very well because it really contributes to all. But also it adds something, for me, I'm not a fisherman, I'm agronomist, and for us, it added something very interesting because we found that in the middle of the desert, people use groundwater to take the salt out of it and then use it for the aquaculture. And then after that, use this water with the wastes, the organic wastes of the fish to be like organic fertilizer to the trees and crops and so on and so forth. So it is really a maximum use for us. It's a maximum use of the one unit of water and 1 unit of land, and also reducing the chemical fertilizer. For sure, this will be contributing to less CO2 emission and so on and so forth. So I think it will be, again, interesting to really add that dimension, not only from the production of fishery only, but also the addition value to the farmer himself, to the environment, and to as in you really call it the climate smart agriculture. And I think that's why this will be very interesting. Really, we would like to really maybe working with you again on that one. And I think this will be very good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the ways of tackling climate change, of course, is by achieving some efficiency gains. And as you rightly said, per unit of input, be it water or land, how can we maximize production, right? For instance, there's a lot of experience on rice fish systems, for instance, from the same plot of land where you can produce protein through fish, but also carbohydrate, rice. And similarly, experiments in Egypt as well, using wheat and fish in the same system, which is quite fascinating in a way where they alternate in seasons. One season from the same plot of land you produce wheat, another season fish as well. So I think these are sort of the innovations that we need to celebrate, highlight, right, and give them the space as well, sort of to be able to share them with a wider audience. And I think I would really appreciate that. I'm really looking forward to collaboration with you. Maybe if I may ask a question to our panelists now. I think one of the other issue that we haven't really discussed here is what role for the private sector? Because I think it was you, Richard, who talked about scale, I think, and I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges, right? Indeed, there are investments from the World Bank, IFAD, and a number of other donors to catalyze change, right? But at the end of the day, to deliver impact at scale, we would need significant, investment from the private sector as well to play that leading role in promoting climate-smart aquatic food production systems. But the biggest question for any private sector actor is, how do you make these interventions investable? Right? I think that's the biggest question. So maybe, shall I start with Gerald, and then Suko, and then maybe Richard, and then Ahmed? Just very briefly, maybe. Yeah?
Thanks. It's a great question. And everywhere this week, with every government who's been asked about the financing question has been not deferring to the private sector, but looking for how public monies, whether bilaterally in grant form or through a multilateral mechanism like the World Bank or IFAD, can actually create the conditions for the scale of financing that's going to be needed. So there is a real question of readiness, and this is why EDF is thinking very hard about what can we do to bring institutions together that can help us, because the scale of the investment required, if we were to look across blue and aquatic foods, inland and coastal fisheries, is enormous. We don't need, I mean, I don't need to tell you that. The how seems to be working not just with the fishers, and there's questions of not just the bankable project, but financial inclusion and literacy, organizational development, investment in those fundamental aspects of being able to manage and deliver, outcomes and cash flow that can pay back. Because the last thing you want to be doing as organizations is setting up indebtedness and creating the wrong conditions. It could fail badly. So it's incumbent upon us to figure out, working together to bring the best science, the best examples that we've just had, together with the sorts of institutional support across the sector. The second piece of that is with the banks themselves. So working with UNEP FI, the Finance Initiative, for example, is just one example, but bringing the banks to actually understand. So when a fisherman walks into a bank, they don't see high risk, low collateral. They see a fisherman with a manageable risk, with the sort of risk profile that they can say, oh, okay, I can talk to you, I can invest in you because I know when the fish come in, when I pay for when I give you a loan for boat repairs and for fuel, at the end of the season, this is actually a manageable risk. And if maybe this is where the public money, the World Bank and IFAD and others are actually discounting some of that opportunity, taking some of the loss to build up an ability to finance this sector effectively. I'm going to stop there, but those are some of the examples we're thinking about.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Gerald. Maybe, Seiko, if you can share your thoughts on that as well, in terms of what the World Bank strategy is, in catalyzing that sort of private sector engagement, but also financing as well, in order to accelerate that transition towards shared prosperity and the changing climate.
Sure. So, from the bank side, the public money is much more limited compared to the private investment. So we always think about how much that we can leverage by investing a dollar from the public financing. So always how this would catalyze the private investment is an important part of our activities, and also especially thinking about the sustainability. We cannot continue to invest on the same activities over and over. So how we normally help is if there's any innovative activities that needs to be tested, that's justifies the public interventions. And how in the SFISH program, how we are helping with the small farmers in Yemen is using the matching grants, so to give some economic incentives so that they can start taking actions to improve their production. But I believe listening to the conversation now, what is more important is to demonstrate the economic benefits, so that in the future if anybody else would like to invest in the similar activities, then it's very important that they are convinced with the economic benefit that comes out of the process. And normally economic analysis is also our comparative advantages, and really supporting the small sub activities are quite important, but also lessons learned, and then also the actual economic analysis and then building the case so that the bank can also understand how beneficial such intervention is also quite important. And so really the public intervention is to kind of, until the private sector is convinced and start injecting the money, we kind of help providing the initial supports to demonstrate the benefits.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Seiko. I think we heard about de-risking. We heard about helping them become more bankable as well, in terms of demonstrating the return on investment, so it becomes more inviting for the private sector to invest in, I think, which makes sense. But also, Richard, any final thoughts on that before we jump to another topic? Richard, from an IFAD perspective.
Yes. Okay. Yes. From IFAD perspective, one of the more recent additions to our financial packages is actually a private sector facility, which allows private sector players to be able to access IFAD's resources, but with certain expectation in terms of good environmental outcomes, good attention, to climate investments, and also expecting that they would contribute, towards supporting smallholders, which are normally IFAD's core target groups, to be able, to access inputs and certain technologies, so enhancing, the benefits beyond, expanding the benefits of the investment put through the private sector. We also have, certain facilities, some which mentions, like use of matching grants to the risks, some of the risks that the private sector would face, especially in entering using some of new innovations. For instance, let me point out, right now there's a lot of attention, especially on the feed system, how to use, for instance, insects to substitute proteins in fish feeds. And some private sector companies are interested in getting into this, yet of course there are certain risks. So the use of matching grants also comes into in such areas. So those are some of the things that actually we do to get the private sector, first of all, engaged in the sector, and try to get the best out of
them. Thank you very much, Richard. And I guess maybe one thing we didn't touch upon perhaps is the blended bit as well. The public and private is slightly blurred as well. So recently, as we all know, the WTO has struck a deal in ending harmful fishery subsidies. And what that means is that, in other way, it's all about transitioning from bad to good subsidies for fisheries. And one way of doing that is if the government could incentivize these kind of innovations using their hard-earned cash as well, right? So once, the risking and making the business case, etc., is set, then there's a very high chance that they would being taken up by the private sector and hopefully catalyze the transition towards shared prosperity. Any other question from the audience? Please, sir.
Just a slightly wider observation. Water is life, the Bedouin would say, and you need water to do freshwater aquaculture. should we not be paying more attention to, for example, the watersheds in the Nile and small projects to enable communities there to regreen, taking livestock off the land and putting them in enclosures, small damming projects which could also be used as for small-scale aquaculture. There have been a couple of these projects in Ethiopia. They're very difficult areas to deal with, but the Ural Sea, the Dead Sea, there so many areas are drying, and the lakes in kind of Western Africa. How do we ensure that that water is there for the future?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Any member of the panel who will be able to take up that question? Maybe Dr. Ahmed and maybe Richard Abil, I would say,
Okay.
the most.
My response to this question is aquaculture, fish in aquaculture system is not user of water. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not consumer of water, but it's user of water. So water after use in aquaculture will be enriched with nutrients.
Yeah.
And these nutrients enhance soil fertility and improve soil characteristics. So in this case, improve soil characteristic, increase crop productivity, and generate income for farmers, and by the end return to nutrition security and prosperity of users. This is our vision, is to shift to 100% climate smart aquaculture system in Delta or in farmed land in Egypt. Now we have 1.5 million Fadan project in desert area. The government policy is integrate aquaculture with this reclamation activity to double use of water before going to crop production system. But in the same time, now we are trying to focus on coastal aquaculture, as you mentioned. So this is one also of the in future vision we need to focus on in future.
Yeah.
Over to you.
I think that's a very good point, though. But also, I think you're absolutely right about the water scarcity issue. You know, if you look at our blue planet, 97.5% of that water is saline. Of the remaining 2/3 is frozen. And of that, again, a significant part of that is underwater. And only 0.3% is available for us to utilize. And therefore, I think if we talk about the future, where fresh water is under so much pressure due to climate change, it will be wise to make that transition or shift towards, you know, how do we harness that saline water to produce food, to feed a growing population, which is projected to grow up to 9 billion by 2050, that is. And but also another study that we did projects that if we were to sustainably manage and produce aquatic foods, we can produce 6 times more than we do today. And these are the sorts of solutions that we know. I think sometimes it's easy to get distracted by the doom and gloom of climate change, but there are solutions. There are myriads of solutions out there that need to be, need to be celebrated, but also work together to scale them so that we can deliver benefits to those who need them most. Right, so I hope that's going to be one of the key messages of this event. But maybe I will take one or so final question. And I just realized midway that I had not introduced myself. I will do that, I promise you, before we finish this session, okay?
Hello, I'm Ajit Govind. I'm a climatologist at ICARDA. Work with Ahmed a lot. So in dry and semi-arid regions, as an important climate adaptation that is overlooked is rainwater harvesting. It is very popular in South Asia, where I'm originally from, where there is something called tank irrigation. So they collect water in large tanks and reservoirs. That can be a fantastic opportunity where fish culture can be enhanced, and I think that's topic which is not much popular, although rainwater harvesting and tank-based rainwater harvesting is closely related to crop production is there, but how it is linked to canal aquaculture is, I think, still not developed. But that's an avenue for exploring. My second point is the issue of processing and storage facilities for the aquaculture. Of course, fish can be harvested after a few or when the farmers needs it, according to the market dynamics. But also, what are your thoughts about storage facilities and value addition? Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Ajit, for those excellent questions. Any takers from the panel on that?
Okay.
Yeah, Richard, please.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought you would come. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think there are certain quite important points. One is cross-sectoral, partnerships in this. I like the idea about paying attention to the catchment afforestation. This is quite key, and this is something that actually we have seen the benefits in IFAD programs. So we normally, when we do aquatic projects, we try to incorporate also, for instance, planting mangroves or catchment improvements. Also, the element of not just water catchment, but also water retention. Now, many areas, for instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, the soils, especially where we are growing fish in ponds, tends to be quite porous. So including, for instance, pond liners, of course, taking note of the risk of use of maybe plastic material, but they really add value, and we have seen this quite a lot in some of the countries where we work. Issues of post-harvest, that is quite still critical, and value addition. So these are things that we have really to look at the entire value chain and not just production. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, for that excellent example. And of course, Ajit, I'll be delighted if you can approach us at some point, because I think there's a lot of exchange of knowledge and information that could be done between ourselves and yourselves. So that'll be a really good opportunity. But maybe just to summarize the excellent discussion, very rich discussion that we had today, thanks to our excellent panelists today, is that I believe that a transition towards a shared prosperity through aquatic food systems under changing climate is indeed possible. But if we were to be able to do that, we need to eliminate some of the systemic constraints or barriers. And some of them, we discussed them today, such as institutional bias and chronic finance gap, and also market fragmentation, such as financial exclusion that Gerald talked about earlier. But also, I think we didn't touch upon that, but also the power imbalances that we face as well, particularly, that are really challenging in lifting people out of poverty. I think if we have that sort of systems level approach to this, where we tackle all the systemic barriers, but also this cross-sectoral approach as well, across land, water, and food systems, and I think there is a great potential that will be able to realize that shared prosperity aspirations. With that said, my name is Issam Yassin Mohammed. I'm the Director General of World Fish and Senior Director of Aquatic Food Systems with the CGIAR. And let me thank our panelists, Seiko, Richard, Gerald, and Ahmed. Please join me in giving a big round of applause, and thank you very much.